I think what disappoints me most about this statement is that he had an opportunity to say, in whatever way he couches it, he had an opportunity to say, look, basically the child abuse was wrong. It should never have happened. The bishops should have reported it to the authorities, and irrespective of what country you are in, if you are a bishop, I am telling you now as your Pope to go into your office, open the files internationally and find out, have you any files of child abuse, and if you have, take it to the relevant authorities. Now, I think if he had done that, we'd have forgiven him all the other weaknesses in that statement, because at the end of the day we'd have said he was really, really serious about protecting children and really genuinely felt the hurt that Irish people feel. I think that's what's missing. I don't feel he really took it the next step and said, let's make sure it never happens again.
Mick Clifford, columnist for the Sunday Tribune and author as well, you've done a big analysis of this in your own paper today, but what seems to be quite stark in terms of its absence from the Pastoral Letter is the Pope's own acknowledgement that the Vatican itself played a role in allowing this secrecy, in actually establishing the oath of secrecy in the first place.
Completely. I mean, he really, and he goes down sort of blind alleys for whatever. I mean, the secularisation, how that impacted anything is just beyond.
Yeah.
But there's other aspects to it. He was talking about situations, giving reasons for what happened. That in some instances, the suitability of candidates for the priesthood and religious life wasn't what it should have been. And that's fair enough, but we're talking historically. That is not the situation today, yet he goes on saying urgent action is needed to address these factors. I mean, and then as well he throws in this thing, what I found amazing, putting down as one of the causes, a tendency in society to favour the clergy and other authority figures. Now, the reason we had that tendency, and there's no doubt it was there, was because the church imposed its will, it exercised its power, and people bowed down before the power. And here now is the man at the apex of that institution coming back and saying, well, one of the reasons was you allowed us to be too powerful, effectively. And
so it's your fault, really, in other words.
Well, to a certain extent.
There is a great truth of that in terms of the collusion between De Valera and particularly
Absolutely.
Archbishop McQuaid.
But then you ask the question immediately, what would have happened to anybody who stood up to that power? And there are a few examples of that, and those people were beaten down in general terms in society. So, and there is that problem that, and as you mentioned, the other aspect to it is he lays the blame at the foot of the bishops. Now, and he has this line where he says, in some instances, the bishops did not comply with canon law.
Yes.
The problem was not the bishops not complying, the problem was canon law and what was involved in that, including one element of it was this oath of secrecy. That came down from the Vatican, as we saw today with Bishop Duffy and with Cardinal Brady, Father Brady as he then was. So, I mean, he seems to be speaking down to the bishops in regard to their faults, yet not acknowledging that a lot of what they did came about because of their adherence to what the Vatican wanted.
He says here, his hardest line seems to be in this. He addresses various people in this pastoral letter, and at point 11 he addresses what he calls "to my brother bishops," and he says it cannot be denied that some of you and your predecessors failed at times grievously to apply the long-established norms of canon law to the crime of child abuse. Serious mistakes were made in responding to allegations. I recognise how difficult it was to grasp the extent and complexity of the problem, to obtain reliable information and to make the right decisions in the light of conflicting expert advice. Again, Mick Clifford, why does he say it was so difficult to grasp the extent and complexity of the problem? Because, again...
Well, to be fair, in that element of it, I think there's no doubt, if we go back 20, 30, 40 years, I think the child abuse was something that was not, people were not as au fait with as they are now. Having said that, in the late 80s, the bishops were sufficiently au fait with it, they were taking out insurance against it. They knew obviously there were implications in that regard. But there is an element that if you go back further, I think there was a problem with grasping the complexity of it. However, there's basic right and wrong, and there's a problem grasping that as well.
Ken Murphy, again, to the papers today, lots of analysis about the future of the Catholic Church and all of that. But what do you make of the pastoral letter?
Well, perhaps an appropriate analogy would be like the curate's egg, good in parts. I've just looked for a way into the analysis of it at the editorials in the four main broadsheet newspapers. The headlines in the Sunday Times is "Pope retreats from moment of history." This is in terms of their editorials. In the Sunday Independent it says "Pope takes steps to real contrition." In the Sunday Tribune, "Real reform of the Catholic Church must begin now." And the Sunday Business Pope says more now needed after Pope's apology. So the Pope gets some marks, I think, from all the editorials for this letter. We, the three of us here to review the papers this morning, were presented with the full text of the letter to read, rather like our penance in advance of,
that was your
of coming here. So we've had the chance to read it, unlike probably most people listening. And presumably the editorial writers have written it. Maybe as a lawyer myself, I'm most intrigued by the constant references to canon law. And the Sunday Independent editorial says, the Pope and his bishops need to understand that canon law is a meaningless concept to anyone who does not exist within the narrow world of the Church. The only law that matters is the law that can put abusers and their protectors behind bars, where they can no longer pose a threat to the children they preyed upon under the cover of doing God's work. And I think there is still an extent to which the letter suggests that they don't quite get it in terms of the primacy that we're dealing with horrific crimes here, and the cover-up of horrific crimes. And words like crimes and cover-up aren't really used. Softer language is used. I don't know whether this is a translation from the original German or something, but it's fairly turgid stuff to read. And there is an extent to which I wonder how effectively it communicates to an audience of Irish people in 2010.
The other thing as well, Ken, is it's interesting that he's saying he's going to send out, his representatives from the Vatican to check out various dioceses here. And you kind of think, well, excuse me, when Judge Yvonne Murphy, in trying to acquire information for her own report, tried to go to the Vatican's representative in Ireland to acquire information, she ran up against a brick wall. So who does he think he is now, that he's going to send out a team of people to actually, to conduct work that in fact maybe the guards should actually be doing at this stage?
I think there is a question about that is ignored, which is the failure of cooperation of the Vatican itself and Vatican authorities with the Murphy report. There is a slightly milk and watery reference to cooperating with civil authorities in relation to their remit, but it doesn't say, and it would be much more powerful to me if the report said that any evidence that anybody in the Church has of child sex abuse should be immediately reported to the civil, namely to the police actually, not even the civil authorities, to the police, and should proceed from there. There's one further point, and it's picked up in the Sunday Times editorial. And it says, the pastoral letter was always going to be particularly difficult for this pontiff, who once ran the office of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, because that was involved in the whole issues in relation to child sex abuse complaints. Instead of acknowledging his own role, however, he blames the secularization of Irish society. And there is an extent, perhaps, that maybe a tiny bit like Brian Cowan in relation to the Irish economy, or Gordon Brown in Britain in relation to the economy, that Benedict himself has been involved with this issue for a number of years as the individual in charge of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. Maybe he has difficulties himself in dealing with all of this.
Yes, but of course we still don't know what's going to come out with the inquiry now in Germany. We know that when he was Archbishop of Munich, there was a case of a priest who, he does not so far seem to have had any direct involvement in this, but this priest, his abusive background was covered up. He later ended up being convicted. Now, and there's an issue about his brother as well being involved in the choir in the 1950s. Presumably, if these investigations in any way implicate the Pope,
you see,
then
it might
you
be
don't
a
go any
hostage
further.
It might be a hostage to fortune for the Pope to say unambiguously that anyone who is in any way involved with some degree of cover-up, or it could be interpreted as cover-up here, should resign. That might rebound on himself.
He has an alternative, though. He has one alternative. What informed the actions of the Church right down through the decades of the hierarchy all the way up to the Pope was the integrity of the institution itself supersedes everything. The safety of children, what has happened to children, criminality among priests, everything it has to be subservient to the integrity of the institution. Not the integrity of it, but the perception of it among the wider public.
Its reputation,
if he came out and said, that is what went on, we are all culpable, we beg your forgiveness, can we move on from here? Anything less than that, and there's always going to be questions, because everybody believes that to be the situation as it pertained at the time.